Hi everybody. Don't know whether any of you lot remember me or not. I know it's been a while. I've got some excuses, but it is what it is. The videos will come when they're ready, simple as that. I apologise they're not on a regular basis, but so now luckily I had two of these kits because one seemed to be lacking some parts, and as I mentioned in the video later, luckily they weren't important parts. So I've had to cannibalise from the other kit to finish the build off. Now I had initially made a start on a tank video about a week in. For whatever reason, I can't remember now. If I pick it up again, I'll probably know why I put it back. That all went out the window. Now the 400 is a kit I've been wanting to build for some time now. I keep picking it up and then putting it back, and it's all down to the rigging. If I was going to build this kit, I would have to tackle the rigging, which is not one of my strong points. But here we are, and so obviously I've tackled it, had a go, and we shall see whether it's any good or not. So before we get into the build, I do want to thank the people who contribute financially to this channel with their hard-earned pennies. It's much appreciated. It all goes on buying Tamiya paints, especially the Tamiya masking tape and things like that. So enough of me, and let's get on and see what I did with this build. Amazing box artwork. Catches something that other top box artwork doesn't these days, which I think's a shame. The Sunderland, another good piece of artwork. Pity about the kit though. Now I know all the parts are not here, but thankfully the most important ones are. The wing parts. Holes for the rigging, nice idea. The texture on the surface looks very nice, but what it looks like under a layer of paint is another question. Now the fuselage parts remind me of the Skyvan build. They've gone about it in the same way. There is some very nice surface detail here, along with some very fine stitching. A look at the other parts. Props look nice. Now I first thought this was a bomb trolley, but this is to wheel the aircraft around. The transparent parts, to which I don't think I'll use, except for the windscreens maybe. They're not very good. With this build, we need to read the text. So I've done my usual and cleaned up all the parts. And one figure down here, I've just got the 2 where there should be 3. Now, as far as the pin marks go on the fuselage parts, I'll tackle them when I know what I can get away with. So I've made a start by assembling some of the parts, like the engine housing, which needed some painting first inside. Also things like the wheels. So the internals of the sides are next, and I have an infestation of pin marks. Now hopefully I don't need to tackle them all. So it's a matter of seeing through the openings the ones that will need my attention. So I'm starting with the lower front floor first, by adding strips of this stuff over the pin marks. Now hopefully with paint and a wash the pin marks will be greatly reduced. Here I wanted to boost the wiring detail that will be seen through the top opening. Next I need to add all the internal parts. This means I was forced to read the text. Which way round? 50-50? Just making sure that this is plumb. With the glue set, I've given the internal areas a coat of Tamiya white, ready for the brushwork. So using this colour and adding a lot of white, I've come up with this mix. I'll let that dry and see whether it needs to be darker or lighter. So happy with that shade and it dry, I've picked out the framework with this rust colour. Now the first coat looked a bit weak, so I ended up giving it another coat. So let's start to put this jigsaw together. I'll start with the 2 fuel tanks. I will let them dry before moving on. Now for the front. So with the front dry, this area needed a lot of cleanup, and in doing so took most of the detail off. So I need to add it back on. So I'm going to let that dry before bending it around the corner. So on to the other parts. I'll start with this top part by just gluing one side first, or one edge first. So one side is glued and waiting to dry, and the other side is held in place with some tape, just to keep the shape. So you can see there's going to be a bit more work to do to make these edges a bit more presentable. Just need to add the lower front and the front console, which I've painted and added some dials on. So I've cleaned up the edges as best I can, and I've tried to keep that squared off look. And I won't really know what it looks like until the first layer of paint goes down. The rear tail was an awful fit, and I also forgot to add the transparent part which fits at the back here. The wings are my next stage, and I've spent some time getting these to fit as well as possible. I want to try and avoid any filler. While I'm here, I need to add some extra holes for some of the bracing around the struts. Here, and here, and so on. The tail assembly. I've dry fitted the top part just to act as a jig while the glue dries. Back to the wings, and I will start with the top parts first. These need to have a dihedral to them. I'm not going to explain why or where I'm going with this whole wing assembly. It's just better to watch. I'm sure there are quicker ways to approach this complex wing assembly, especially with the rigging. So the outer top parts are slightly warped in the middle and need straightening. So I'm counting the number of squares to place a block that will add and keep that dihedral on the outer wings. The parts are glued and set. I also glued the bottom and upper parts of the wing. Next, the top lower wing parts. I'll glue the 3 parts, and I'm not using much glue. I don't want the glue to bond the parts to the mat. But before the glue dries properly, I'll use the top wing as a jig. The lower upper wings next. I'll tape the middle part on as this needs to come off later. Just checking the wings look even. And I've run a tiny bead of glue along the top intersection of the wing and the body. So let's add the struts. So with the glue on the struts not quite set, I'll gingerly place the lower top wing assembly. I've just cut out a piece of polystyrene to help with the support of the upper wing. Just adding tape to secure the wing. Then clip and glue the struts to the upper lower wing. I'll leave that side to dry first before tackling the other side. So I've gone around all the struts with a bit more glue. Once that's dry, I'll add the last 2 rear struts. These sit behind the engines. So onto the rigging, and I'll be using Ammo's 0.02mm rigging. But before I do that, I want to give a base coat to everything, ready for the paint to add later, and also to spot for any imperfections. So for the base coat, I've added Tamiya's buff. So what doesn't help me with this rigging is that I've got no enthusiasm for this task whatsoever, which is a killer trait in any walk of life. Into the hole you go. You're going in whether you like it or not. Pull through. A dab of glue. Then through the next hole. Pulled, taut and glued. Now I am hoping to get better and quicker as I get used to this process. A long way to go. Looks a mess, but no one's going to see this in the end. Let's see if I can get this to be seen a bit more clearly. So the whole rigging internally is finished and the outrigger too. Just need to finish off the rigging on the top and then I can get this wing assembly finished. And the sooner I do that the better, as this is all very fragile and ready to collapse within itself. I can feel it in my bones. Now I've just applied some very thick German grey to seal the holes up. It was only later that I thought PVA glue might have been a better choice. Now to finish the wing assembly, I'll start with a lower central piece. Then the upper wing, and being long, I'll start by gluing the centre first and working my way outwards. Lastly, the 2 outer lower wings. So some time has passed, in fact some weeks have passed, and I've tried to remove the very small seams to the adjoining parts on the wings. This hasn't worked very well. Not only that, I was also removing a fair amount of detail. So I've decided to cover up the seams with thin strips of Tamiya tape. Now before any of you leave in disgust at this cheap shortcut, this should and will look okay under a few layers of paint. I hope. So on to the first layer of paint, and I'm going to use this reactive green, maybe mixed with a bit of black and a bit of khaki. The olive green looked a little too light and bright. Yes, I'm going to apply the paint by brush in light washes. I don't like the idea of paint going onto the rigging by airbrush. I'm scared of the build-up. The brush gives me more control, but the downside to that, it gives me more work to do. So I'm going to apply the paint in sections. With the first coat dry, the second coat will go on. So it took 3 light washes before I was happy with the coverage. The nice thing about paint applied by brush is that it gives you that uneven finish. Next, I'll use Tamiya Buff to highlight the surface detail, just as I have done with the engine nacelles. These have had a satin finish added to them, and I just need to add a Tamiya wash. So I've added the rear rigging, just need to trim and clean up around the top here. Now I'm going to be using PVA glue to attach this part. Now that's not going to work, I can't see the holes underneath. The torch wasn't the answer either. It's quite surprising how flexible plastic can be, but I got there in the end. So onto the props, and these have been prepped with a coat of Tamiya white. Then using these 2 colours, I'll apply a light wash. With that thoroughly dry, I'll use a burnt umber to create the wood effect. Now I've prepped the surface with a little bit of water first. And I'm going to start off light and then build the tone up after each coat has dried. So the first coat is dried, ready for the second. Just need to get rid of the excess water. So after the third coat, I'll stop as the tone of the prop was getting a bit too dark. My biggest worry here was to make sure that both props look the same in style and tone. Now the tips of the blades have a greyish coat, that's next. I'll seal all this in with a Vallejo satin varnish. So onto the decals. Not bad considering their age. I tried to source some replacements, would have been a lot easier, but to no avail. So I've given these a coat of decal film. And just in case all else fails, I've created some artwork ready to create some masks, if I have to. I don't really want to go down that road. I'm not in the mood for it. So the decals have been added and went down really well. It's just a pity that they're out of register and a bit transparent and a bit crap. So I had scored around the decals to lose that yellow carrier film. Didn't want to really bring that to the model. I also had to square off the outer register fin flashes. Talking of which, there was some confusion about the orientation of the red on the fin flashes. The red is shown at the back rather than the front, looking at the box artwork. So let's get this thing finished. Just need to add all these parts. So I'm going to start with the engine assemblies, and I'll be using PVA glue for this. Right, I'm going to have to force this strut using a bit of brute force. So I'm going to be doing this off camera. Won't be a minute. So I've taken some paint off, but that's an easy fix. The other side. Next, the longer of the 2 struts on the inside. then the short, thick one. Then lastly, the rear V-strut. Onto the fiddly landing gear. Not too bad. Fitted very well. The kit's rear skid was replaced. So at last I've managed to finish this. Just. Another one ticked off the bucket list. There also seem to be some differences about the machine gun placements. The kit had one at the front and two either side of the rear fuselage opening, but I decided to place two at the front and one at the rear, looking at photographs. I could be wrong. Let me know. So for its age, a very good kit. Very little filler was needed, and that fine surface detail shows through that paint nicely. And as always with old Airfix kits, it captures the subject very well. So I want to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you for the next build, whenever that is. See you later.